ES6 comes with a new way of creating functions which are called arrow functions. I'm going to comment out any code inside the index file. I'm now going to create a function called hello, and all it will do is output a simple message. Lastly, I'm going to call this function. This is a regular function. I'm going to run the node app/index command. As expected, this will just output the message. Nothing really new so far. Arrow functions are a new way to create functions. The syntax can be a bit confusing at first, but it's definitely more readable once you understand what's going on. To create an arrow function, you need to do the following. First, you don't need to use the function keyword, so you can safely remove that. Next, you'll have to remove the name of the function. Then, you need to add the following symbols after the parenthesis: equal sign, greater than sign. This is what JavaScript calls a fat arrow. Lastly, you can remove these curly braces and move the message on the same line. This is a very basic example of an arrow function. It's a shorter way of writing a function. Right off the bat, arrow functions are completely anonymous. You cannot just write an arrow function by itself. You either have to assign it to a variable or pass it into another function that will use it. If you were to add the name of the function before the parenthesis, then you will receive an error. Let's first learn how to assign it to a variable. I'm going to create a variable called hello. The value of this variable will be assigned to the arrow function like so. Just like that, the arrow function is now usable. I can run the node command again and you'll see the message just like before. Let's do a side-by-side comparison. I'm going to add a comment above indicating that this is an arrow function. Then I'm going to create a normal function like the one we had before. These two functions do the exact same thing and are completely identical as far as functionality goes. The only noticeable difference is the way they're written. Unlike arrow functions, regular functions are usually multi-line even if you only have one line of code. Of course, you can always move everything to be one line of code. However, the code becomes less readable. The arrow function is much more readable and shorter to write. I'm going to comment out the regular function. Let's keep working with the arrow function. Arrow functions can also be multi-line. To make a multi-line function, you can just add in the curly brackets. The curly brackets are completely optional if you have one line of code, but required if you want to have multiple lines. Just like any other function, we can also have parameters. I'm going to create a parameter called param1. To have multiple parameters, you can just add a comma to separate each parameter. For now, I only want one parameter. I'm going to update the code where I called the hello function and pass in a message. I want to use this parameter, so I'll replace this static message with the message we're passed in. Lastly, I'm going to run my command. The script should work as expected where the message is being outputted onto the console. This is pretty simple so far. There are two things you should be aware of when using arrow functions. The first thing is that the parentheses are optional if you only have one parameter. In this example, we only have one parameter, and so we can just remove the parentheses from this line of code. This is completely valid and allowed. However, this option is only available if you have one parameter. For example, if an arrow function has 0 parameters, then you're required to have parentheses. If you have one parameter, then you have the option of using parentheses. If you have 2 or more parameters, then you're required to have parentheses. I'm going to add my parentheses back in even though we only have one parameter. This right here is preference. Throughout this course, I will continue using parentheses even if my arrow functions only have one parameter. The second thing you need to be aware of is that arrow functions do not have a scope. Right below this bit of code, I'm going to create an object called foo. This object will have two properties. Prop1 will be set to 10. Prop2 will be a regular function that logs prop1. There are two ways to reference prop1. I can use the foo variable and then access its property, or I can use the this keyword. The this keyword is the most commonly used method. I'm going to run my node command and I should see the number 10 outputted. Let's try using arrow functions now. I'm going to remove the function keyword and add in the fat arrow. Lastly, I'm going to run the command again and see what we get. Node will not throw an error, but instead output undefined. Arrow functions don't really have a scope. This means that the this keyword doesn't really exist. What JavaScript will do is look up one level and see if that property exists. If we want to output prop1, we would have to change the this keyword to foo. Then we can run the command and we should see the number being outputted again. That's all there is to it. Arrow functions are popular for two reasons. The first reason is that it's easier to read and write than regular functions. The second reason is that the scope becomes less of a problem. This is because you know what to expect even if you have nested functions. Since arrow functions have no scope, it becomes easier to understand where variables are coming from. I know it may not seem like a big deal, but it really does matter when we begin writing bigger applications. Throughout this course, we will use arrow functions a lot.